A champion is bred from hard times, scarred mind standing on the ledge. The squad grind all time, victory in spite of opposition. Welcome to competition. You pick a side, I pick a side, they pick a side. Take a knee against abuse, they rather you die. Pushing through dark tunnels, trying to shed light. The fight is on the moment we enter the game of life. Get it right before the whole thing gone dead. Let's go ahead and take it there. Meet me on the edge.
Welcome to Edge of Sports TV, only on the Real News Network. I'm Dave Zirin. It is time to ask a sports scholar, and this week we are talking to Dr. Ajhanai Keaton from Louisville about her work. It's astounding. I can't wait for you to learn what she's all about. Let's go right now. Dr. Keaton, thank you so much for joining us here on Edge of Sports.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you do critical work and frankly, really exciting work on the intersection of sports and politics. But before we get into the work you do, what is it like to do that kind of scholarship at a big-time sports school like Louisville?
The ideas never run out. I mean, just the attending the games, being a part of an institution like Louisville, knowing the history, knowing our own personal scandals that have happened. I tend not to run from that. I think I lean into it with students. I take the stance that we understand the reality of how things have played out. If we just think about Rick Pitino, we can also think about just the treatment of Coach Payne right now. I can't shut off the realities and disparate treatment of identity in this space, particularly in a city like Louisville. Its connection to Muhammad Ali, the ideas are endless. I just need more time and more doc students.
I was going to have a question about what it's like to do this kind of work where Muhammad Ali was both born and raised, and where you have the Ali Center, right down the way. How does that shape your work, if at all?
It's shaped how I've really gone about creating classes. So I'm in a sport administration or sport management program, a field that definitely has critical folks spread throughout, but at its core foundation, it's not critical. It wasn't meant to be critical. It kind of came out of sport participation and coaching and has much more into management. But I created courses that get students who want to be ADs or coaches or work in sales and operations to still take critical classes. And one of those classes is the history of the Black athlete. And for a lot of students that come to U of L, they're excited about the sporting programs, but they don't really have a connection to the city. And so in one of the modules where we really dive into, what was it like for those that live here, the Black community in particular, to be a part of Ali's return home. A family friend of ours, the Porter Funeral Home, they actually drove his hearse, around the city to commemorate his death. And the city was on standstill. And so I like to share that history with students. So they're not just coming here with, I'm getting my 4 degrees and out. Like, you're actually at a really historical sports city.
I was there and saw the hearse.
Okay.
And saw school buses of children chanting Ali Boumaye,
right?
Which is kind of an incredible cross connection. If people are familiar with the Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire, everybody should see the documentary When We Were Kings. Then we can have the discussion. Okay,
absolutely.
Your work centers on race and gender in sports. That's a part of your work that you do, not the entirety, of course. And I noticed that you received your PhD at Yukon.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the epicenter of the last generation of women's hoops.
Mm-hmm.
How did getting your PhD, if at all, shape your work and your consciousness about these issues?
It was the first time where I was at a college institution where women's sports seemed to run the campus. Although men's basketball has been wildly successful at Yukon, I know they are now. But at that time where I was there, 2017 to 2021, men's basketball was going through a rough time. And so to be somewhere where, hey, are you going to the game? And the assumption isn't the men's game or not even the football game. They're talking about the women's basketball game. Field hockey was also wildly successful at that time as well, won multiple national championships. And so it really did spark an interest in me to really start thinking about organizational behavior through a critical lens. Being a former basketball player myself, playing at a, mid-major Division 1, it's a totally different ball game being on at a campus like Yukon where they're the Huskies, right? And that just has this cultural, it's like seeing a cultural artifact in person that you grew up with. And you're just so impressed and amazed, not only with how they play, but their presence on campus. And so they definitely sparked a new energy in me when just I'm thinking about how to study sport.
Wow. I told you we were going to skip around a little bit, so forgive me for trying to be a little agile here, but you've done so much. Sports at the collegiate level, we know, and I'm sure you see this at Louisville, and I'm sure you saw it at Yukon, is now defined by athletes in a race for NIL money, name, image, and likeness money. Since we've seen, this eruption of NIL money, how have Black women done in this space? And are existing inequalities being reproduced?
Existing inequalities, absolutely. I think, but also what's fascinating is how they're also challenging those inequalities. And so I'll just share a paper. It's not out right now, but working on it with my doc student Keisha Branch and a colleague Evan Frederick, is we're taking Angel Reese as a case study and we're studying how she talks back to that. And so when you think about Black women's presentation in terms of marketing, their relationship with brands, how authentic were they able to be decades ago, right? Trying to maybe portray or position self into white femininity to be more marketable. Angel Reese is none of that. She is authentically, in her own words, hood, authentically that girl. And that hasn't stopped these very white centric entities, Mercedes Benz, Amazon, from wanting her to be a part of that brand and face. And so we've conceptualized, firstly, how her TikTok presence and how she brings Black culture to the forefront. And what we mean by that is the aesthetic of Black hip hop feminism, the aesthetic of weaves and edges and hair. She is essentially using Black culture, what she is a part of, it is hers, in an authentic way to market self. And we just really haven't seen that before, particularly from the brands that are interested in working with her. And I believe she's top 10 with NIL deals and looking at 1.7 right now, 1.7 million, which is, that's huge.
How much of this is Ms. Reese challenging the expectations, challenging these companies to take her seriously? And how much of it is these companies seeing Angel Reese and saying, whoa, you're following your edge, if you will. That's what we want to represent our company because you have people's ear in a way that typically, say, Mercedes-Benz does not.
Mm-hmm. It's 100% interest convergence. If we get back to critical race theory and white interests, or white structures, white institutions are only interested in Black things, Black needs when it satisfies those white interests. And so I think it's a yes, but it's still fascinating. I think when we're talking about how to manage self in an online presence, don't be too outspoken because you might not have the ear and so, to see her not care and still be financially compensated for that. I think the follow-up to it is, can other Black female athletes engage and present themselves in a similar fashion as Reese in online spaces? I think that's the question to really understand. Is she the anomaly, or is this now the norm in the NIL era because this authenticity and connection to Black culture, Black hip hop, she's playing City Girls in the background, talking about 30-inch busted down weaves. Like, it's just a different culture. And so as we, particularly at the collegiate level, continue to make sense of NIL, is this starting a new norm where, because it's profitable, these brands want this access to the Black community, and how will these Black athletes respond?
Yeah. You've also written about Brittney Griner, someone we've discussed on this show more than a little bit. What does the Brittney Griner saga, the story, her experience in a Russian prison, the response of the United States, what does it tell us? What lens does her case provide us in understanding these dynamics of race, gender, and sports?
It's a great question. For me, just engaging in that project, what it tells us is like the polarization that we feel in this country, the polarization that we see, that we read. She unfortunately became the muse to really understand politics in America at that moment.
Mhm.
Um, Jules Boykoff, who I know you know well, and their colleague, they just did a fascinating paper looking at when did the right actually get interested in Brittney Griner. They looked at media articles, and what's fascinating is it wasn't until her return home. And so, what my work really captures is that how this return home became a weaponization of being Black, lesbian, and a woman, and really played into the alt right and right wing understandings of replacement theory. And so here she is just trying to live her life, get home safely. And we navigate that as a country, for all intents and purposes, successfully. We brought her home, but yet that American pride that we should have all been wrapping around, that we brought one of our fellow Americans home, became a cultural war about wokeness, and illegitimately applying this incorrect notion of what Kimberly Crenshaw coined intersectionality to then reposition white people as the ones as disadvantaged, and particularly white heterosexual men. And so I'm glad that that hasn't necessarily overshadowed her return home. I know there were other great pieces and great moments captured, but for me, and from my lens, I couldn't ignore how this perspective was just continuing to further dehumanize her experience when that was the energy that she returned back to.
Yeah, it was certainly an ugly view into what some people see as American, who gets to be American.
Who gets
I
to
mean,
be American? We should
yeah,
have all been rallying around that. Like that I mean, to engage in those negotiations with Russia, and I understand, it came at a cost, but to weaponize her humanity to say that she's not good enough because of who she is and what she looks like, was just a very dehumanizing experience.
no, I see that for sure. Uh, you've also studied what's called an ADIO,
Mhm.
Athletic Diversity and Inclusion Officers. I mean, for people very new to this, what is an athletic diversity and inclusion officer? And do you see ADIO as a positive force in this space, or one that deserves the kind of criticism that you provide?
Yes, another yes and no
Got
response
you.
here. So ADIO is the term I came up with. It stands for Athletic Diversity and Inclusion Officer. It's a very basic term, but essentially it captures the positions that we see at the NFL, we see at many Division One institutions, NBA, individual teams, and the MLB have them, and they're essentially positions that are formally tasked to study and focus on advancing DEIB in their respective sport organization. The position is complex. The complexity to me is the context of this work. When did these positions arise? Many of them a response to the murder of George Floyd. And then who did they task to do this work? And so if you can imagine many of these organizations not having Black representation at a senior level or at a level that was making decisions, and now you've gone and hired Black people to say, make us diverse and inclusive. We want you to lead that effort. But Black people in this organization are marginalized. And so what my work with ADIOs really gets at is how do you hire people who are marginalized by these organizations to then change that marginalization. And I think my work is really trying to get the leaders who hire those individuals, the leaders who work with those individuals, which should be everybody in the organization, marketing, sales, everyone should be intersected with that individual who's advancing DEIB, but they're isolated. They're isolated on an island that just makes it so hard to advance this work. In the paper you're referring to, I really dig into it with Black women because before my scholarship, it's been well documented in academic sport research that Black women experience sexism and racism in the workplace. How do we tell them, hey, we understand people like you experience sexism and racism, but help us fix our organization? And so I just want, particularly with that piece, to see for Black women leaders to not have to be strong, to not have to be strong Black women for the sake of white organizational interests. And so I celebrate the position, I acknowledge it, but I also question it and provide a critical lens to it because they need more support and structure that these organizations currently aren't providing.
How difficult is it to provide a critical lens on this issue at the same time where in the post George Floyd backlash, these organizations are under withering attack by right-wing state governments? Is it difficult to defend them as
Mm.
entities while also criticizing them for how they can do this better?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dave, because that criticism could be used, to further either click delete on the positions or for these organizations to say, we no longer see you as valuable. My critique comes less upon the individual doing the work and more upon the organizations not um, not letting go of how they're maintaining structures and barriers to hinder their work. And
Mm,
so I hope the critique, although coming from that alt-right movement, is still upon how can organizations do this? How, we don't need this. That's not what I'm saying. The need is there. But if you're saying this is a need, your barriers can't further marginalize the person doing the work because what ends up happening is they say, enough's enough. I mean, we've seen it across higher education. A lot of people are, taking a step back from DEI work because it's exhausting. It's not an easy job by any means.
mm. So I want everybody out there to know that Dr. Ajhanai Keaton did not know any of these questions beforehand. I've been unfairly jumping all over the place. She's been an absolute wizard in jumping with
Appreciate
me,
that,
which I
Dave.
really do appreciate. And so with that, I'm going to put you on the spot one more time. Could you recommend to our audience one book to
Hmm.
better understand what you do? What would that book be for people to understand what has inspired Dr. Keaton to do this kind of work?
Do you mind if I grab it real quick?
Oh my goodness. People aren't going to believe that I that you didn't know that question was coming if you've got a
I mean,
prop there, but I give people my word on that one.
I am in my office. This text, just simple intersectionality. For me, it's become obviously a word like critical race theory, where people think they know it. Critical race theory is teaching Ruby Bridges. No, it's not. No, it's not. Like, so let's go back to the foundations and really look at what is intersectionality, why does it matter, and to understand that these theories don't just apply to Black people or to people who are marginalized. They're sense making tools so we can better understand our social world, and create a more equitable social world. And if that's what both sides espouse, then both sides, and I'm really thinking very liberal, conservative, right wing. We need to understand and be able to speak the same language. And so when you manipulate terms and concepts, we're no longer speaking the same language, and we're not even able to have a true meaningful dialogue. So intersectionality, let's get on the same page.
Amen. It is a source of frustration when words are used for the purposes of destroying what those words are meant to promote
Absolutely.
without reckoning with what those words actually mean.
Absolutely.
My goodness. Dr. Ajhanai Keaton, how can people stay up with your work? Let me ask you that before we go.
Yes, you can, of course, always hit me up on Twitter. I'm very engaging. There's always something popping off in sport. I'm not sure if you saw that to Dave. The "Don't Be a Cheryl" shirts. Did you see that recently?
No, please tell us.
There's always something on Twitter, but essentially, some Iowa fans of Caitlin Clark's great player. Cheryl Swoops made some comments about her. Misspoke a little bit, but it's Cheryl Swoops. She's
Sure.
very knowledgeable, and the backlash response was "Don't be a Cheryl," which is essentially "Don't be a Karen." It's white woman's play on "Don't be a Karen." So there's always
Ugh.
something. There's always something. But you can find me on Twitter, and also my university affiliated page and Google Scholar page. If you're looking for my research, you can just type in my name, Ajhanai Keaton, and it'll be there.
I may have to take out my old pair of Air Swoops from the closet just
Please,
to
yep.
show some solidarity.
Go ahead
Uh,
and check it out.
Dr. Keaton, thank you so much for joining us here on Edge of Sports.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work, so please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.